when you leave this earth, or when you leave, what's something you want to be known as, and he said it. He said, I want to be known as a peacemaker or as a humanitarian. As veterans, when we go serve our country, we go serve the entire country. He's really known as a humanitarian in the later part of his life.
When you say Harris, nobody knows who that you're talking about. Yeah? No, nobody has any idea. Harris. Hey, where's Harris? They know Kamala. They know Kambabla. That was the nickname I used for a while, but I don't use it anymore because everyone thought I was just mispronouncing her name. I wasn't. Kambabla.
This past Sunday, the United States said farewell to its 39th president. Its oldest living president, Jimmy Carter, born October 1st, 1924, dying December 29th, 2024, would make former President Jimmy Carter 100 years old. Welcome to Cozy Corner TV, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Kieran Smith, call me Q, and we are on the corner. Ladies and gentlemen, we're on the corner, and we are talking about former President Jimmy Carter, who has passed away. When Jimmy Carter comes to mind, there are a lot of different things that come to mind along with him. He could be the president that was hired after the Watergate scandal. He can be the president whose administration was overwhelmed by problems in it. Or he can be the president that in the days, these past couple of days, as we reflected on his death, he could be the president that's known as the biggest peacemaker that American history has seen. That could be debatable depending on who you're talking to. But let's take a look at how Jimmy Carter was remembered, is being remembered, and how he's being remembered.
Our former president, Jimmy Carter. It includes public viewings in Atlanta and Washington, as well as a national day of mourning. ABC's Nicole D'Antonio has details.
This morning, tributes continue to pour in for the late President Jimmy Carter, his life dedicated to public service before and long after his time in the White House.
He was an honest man. I think his legacy would be his honesty, his faith, and in politics, that's kind of rare today.
Mourners across the country paying their respects, from Atlanta outside the Carter Center to the United Nations.
I would ask all in the chamber now to rise and join in a minute of silence in memory of President Jimmy Carter.
An 8-day...
To that gentleman's point where he said, he was a good man, speaking to his faith and things like that. And he says that's kind of rare, to find in these days. Well, to Jimmy Carter's defense, he was president in 1977 to 1981, where politicians were a little bit more outspoken about being in the faith or being Christians. They weren't hiding it maybe as much, or it was more talked about. It was definitely more welcomed during that time. So, and in his defense, he's pretty much right if we talk about the time Jimmy Carter was actually president.
Period of mourning begins tomorrow, which includes a state funeral in Georgia. President Carter's remains will lay in repose at the Carter Presidential Center, then flown to D.C. to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol, and end with a national memorial service in Washington, where President Biden will deliver his eulogy.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
Jimmy Carter took the oath of office in January 1977. His critics will argue that his presidency had mixed reviews with challenges at home and abroad. But there is much more agreement that his post-White House life was remarkable, building homes for the poor even into his 90s. And through the Carter Center, bringing fair elections and an end to diseases in places around the world.
I think that planes impacted every facet of his life. I was talking to somebody this morning, and the thing about it is, he always came home. He always came home.
Carter's body will then be laid to rest at his home in Plains, Georgia, alongside his wife of 77 years, Rosalind Carter. Nicole D'Antonio, ABC News, Washington.
Jimmy Carter's grandson, Jason, will deliver one of the eulogies. Today on Good Morning America, he shared his memories of his grandfather.
I have a lot of memories of, like others do, of him taking me fishing or, sitting around talking about what I should do in my life. I mean, when I graduated.
This gentleman, Jason, this is actually Jimmy Carter's grandson, so he'll be performing the eulogy at his funeral. I believe it's sometime today. If it wasn't today, it was yesterday. But seeing what I can see online and the research that I've done, it looks like it was sometime yesterday where he actually delivered his eulogy. They were very close. They've asked him questions about his grandfather, and he's done other interviews. And I love that he always says, first and foremost, he was always my grandfather first to me. So I love that.
graduated from college, he and I sat down, and I said, what would you do if you were me? And he said, I would go to Africa and join the Peace Corps. And so I did that, I mean, and so he's an interesting guy, but he really was a grandfather to me first.
WFAA's coverage of the funeral and legacy of Jimmy Carter will continue throughout the next 2 weeks, both on air and online.
Former President Jimmy Carter has really had an impact on a lot of people post his administration. This is where we hear the term peacemaker come from. He's really known as a humanitarian in the later part of his life, as they mentioned, working on things like Homes for Habitat of Humanity into his 90s. So a lot of resilience there, a lot of dedication to people in his community there. And a lot of people who were in favor of Jimmy and who really loved him, they speak of him that way. They speak of him that way as someone who fought for the country. It doesn't matter what president dies, it's a piece of American history. That's kind of just the way I view it, whether they were a Democrat or Republican. I don't usually pay attention to that. As I've said in previous videos, as veterans, when we go serve our country, we go serve the entire country. We're not worried about race, creed, Democrat, Republican, especially when we got bullets flying down range at us. So at the end of the day, President Jimmy Carter, our oldest living president, has left this earth. He was a humanitarian to many people. He helped many people. As I said, people feel very, his presidency, his administration's a bit controversial. Some people loved him a lot. Some people didn't like him so much, but that's like every single administration, right? But I think that if we just look at some of the things that he did, especially post his administration, he really wanted to stand for peace, and he really wanted to be known as someone who cared about people. I remember one interview I watched not too long ago when someone was interviewing him and they asked him, when you leave this earth or when you leave, what's something you want to be known as? And he said it. He said, I want to be known as a peacemaker or as a humanitarian. And since we have been reflecting on his death these last couple of days, those are the words that we hear looming around former President Jimmy Carter. So drop down in the comments what you guys think about the passing of our 39th president. Where do you stand when presidents pass away? There will be a National Day of Mourning for former President Jimmy Carter. I believe it's going to be on January the 9th. Let's take a look here. Yeah, it's January the 9th when they're going to do it. They talked a little bit about why they were doing this. And funny thing is that President Trump is actually mentioned as to why President Biden might have actually put forward this day of mourning, which we've seen former presidents do this in the past. But about a little bit about Jimmy Carter, it says here, despite notable accomplishments as president, his time out of the White House, which is what we've talked about, may have arguably eclipsed his tenure as chief executive, including decades of humanitarian work leading to the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. So that was a huge award that Jimmy Carter had awarded to him, the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. The day off for federal employees follows recent precedent as President Trump similarly closed agencies when President George H.W. Bush died in 2018. So we've seen former presidents do this in the past. When a president that was president passes away, they respectfully give a day of mourning, usually fly the American flag at half-mast at the Capitol. So all of the things should be happening. Again, you guys drop down in the comment section, what do you think about the passing of former President Jimmy Carter? Do you remember much about him? When you talk to your parents or your grandparents about him, what are the first things they remember about him, or what are some stories you guys have heard about him? I can't wait to hear. Thank you guys again for stopping by and chilling with me on the corner. Until next time, guys, take care of yourselves, be peaceful, love one another, love yourself. Peace.